sure you're very excited to start this whole college process. I'm Susan Mancuso, I'm the Director of School Counseling. All of our counselors are here this evening. Mr. Smith is in the back there, Mr. Fitzgerald, Mrs. Carney, and Mrs. Lukovich. So we have actually started the process of meeting with all of the juniors, and so now you are going to be getting the same information that they are receiving as well. We just think it's great that everyone has all the information. How many of you are first-timers, first child? We anticipate a majority. How many are coming back for a refresher? All right, welcome back. We're happy to see you. So we're going to go through a series of things this evening. You have the PowerPoint handout in front of you. This is also being live streamed tonight through eCat and Facebook Live. And we will be sending out an email tomorrow for those who can't make it or just want the PowerPoint in a digital copy. I'll be emailing that out to all junior parents tomorrow, along with some supplemental handouts that will be helpful for you. Okay? So, here we go. Thank you. So, a couple of things you'll hear is we always talk about the idea of what's your plan, and we talk about it every year with the kiddos, whatever their plan may be. So we'll address that tonight with you as well. We will talk about how to actually conduct a search process. We are showing the kids how to do this as well. We are doing this individually, and we will be doing group work with the kids at the end of January, so it's a lot of repetition, just so they're remembering where to go in, find the information. We'll talk about college admissions testing. Yep, still around, still a thing, so we'll kind of talk about that piece, along with the common application, what that is, how it works. Deadlines, which doesn't happen right away, but it's something we want you to be aware of right now as you're starting this preliminary process. And then the college questionnaire, will explain what that is. And just so you're aware, we do this now for you as junior parents. We will also have another one in September for you as senior parents, where we really dig into the nitty-gritty of who actually sends what, how do we now, we've figured out the colleges, we know what we want to do, but how do we now complete the application, execute it, and get the items out. So we will have that piece in the fall, as well as more information about financial aid. So tonight's goal is really just to have a preliminary conversation about what the kids and you as a family should be thinking about or working on over the next several months. So, paths and options. So we always tell the kiddos, we'll support whatever pathway they're choosing. I will say a large majority of our students are going on to attend 4 and 2-year colleges, but we certainly have kids who are going into the military, straight into the workforce, possibly a gap year. So whatever it is, we work with them and the families to get them prepared for whatever that path is. You know, some kids work for a family company. We've had students who've started their own businesses on their own as independents. We've had students enlisted in the military. So we would just sit with them and go through the necessary steps for whatever that pathway requires. You know, again, I think, you're here this evening because your students are thinking about a college, whether it's 2-year, 4-year, trade school, technical school. So we'll work on that. But we do have kids who are considering other options, and we will support them with whatever their plan is, okay? And this is a nice, I know it's hard to see, that's why you have the handout there as well, but we share it with the students as well. And our message is always to try to reiterate to them, like, whatever your path is, we'll work with you on it. You just need to start thinking about what that is. We're going to switch gears now, and Mrs. Carney is going to jump in and talk about the next few slides for you.
Thank you. So as Mrs. Mancuso said, we have been starting to meet with the juniors, and we will continue to do that over the next several weeks. When we sit down with them, we're kind of explaining the process to them. So that's what we're going to be going over with you tonight, kind of giving you the idea. Some people are also giving out a kind of little planning calendar, which will be included in your materials that get sent to you, to just kind of give you a bird's eye view of, you know, what the next year and a half is going to look like. Have a family conversation. It's one of those things that I think sometimes it just seems like, you know, it's so overwhelming. But it's important to kind of sit down with your student and have a conversation. Have some of those hard conversations, you know, looking at, you know, what are the expectations, whether or not you're planning on them sticking around or going farther away, how much money, you know, how much debt are you all willing to kind of take on? Because it can be very difficult. I remember once I went to a financial aid program, and they talked about how a lot of times parents say, well, just get into the best place you can and we'll figure it out. And they said, well, if you had to buy them a car, would you say that to them? Would you say, just pick the best car you can, we'll figure it out? You probably wouldn't. So you want to kind of put a little thought into it, from the get-go, just so that, expectations are checked a little bit and that everybody's kind of on the same page as to how this is going to go. The guidance website, I will admit I have been the person who's been putting together the website, so I think it's great. They recently rebuilt, they moved it over to a whole new format, and some of our links are a little lost. They will be getting updated, so if you find a broken link, I promise probably within the week of mid-years, because we tend to have a little more time then, I'm going to be fixing those. But there's a lot of good information on there. There's there's the links we're going to be talking about tonight, such as Naviance and College Board and things like that, but also some others as well. So feel free to take a look at that. And there's a big handout on there about the college application process that even has an index to kind of explain terms and things like that, which sometimes you might need. And Naviance and College Board are certainly the ones that we're going to be touching upon tonight. They're the ones that we use the most, and those are the ones that we have been showing the students as well. Thank you, sir. So when choosing a college, there's so much to consider. Certainly the biggest one is 2-year, 4-year technical or trade school, to get an idea of exactly what you're looking for. As Mrs. Mancuso said, the bulk of our students, 84%, something like that, go to 4-year colleges. But we do have a growing percentage that have gone the 2-year route. Mass transfer has been gaining a lot of ground, and in fact, in February, I have a on-the-spot decision day with Massasoit. They're going to be coming here to interview our students and accept them into the programs there. Mass transfer is a wonderful thing to do where you go to community college for 2 years and you apply as a mass transfer student. So it's mass transfer business, mass transfer biology, whatever it might be. You do your 2 years at the community college, you get an associate's degree, but at the end of it, they help you transfer into any of the UMass system, and as long as you've gotten basically a B or better in the system on your transcript, you get admitted to any of the schools, automatic admittance, and you get discounts. So it's even cheaper when you go to that UMass Amherst or Boston or Bridgewater or what have you. So oftentimes it's really kind of a great way to do it. It's interesting nowadays, I feel like kids are a little more cognizant of taking on debt. It matters more to them than maybe it did probably 10, 20 years ago. They're a little more sensitive to it. So there's more students who are starting to think of that option. Public versus private. I think I spend a lot of time oftentimes explaining to kids that the public school for them is the UMass system. So if they go to a UConn or a URI or a UNH, we're not getting the in-state tuition for that. It's only if they go to the UMass systems, because that's our state, public system, which tends to be cheaper than the privates. The privates do tend to give more money, more merit aid and things like that, trying to balance it out. But typically across the board, oftentimes the publics do tend to be reasonable. The size of the school, and I think this is a big one. You have to decide whether or not you want like a huge state university where they've got some football teams you can go cheer on. Do you want a mid-size where you feel it's a little more manageable? Do you want a small school where your professors might actually know your name? So kind of understanding that. And when they start to visit schools, that's where they're going to figure that out. They're going to walk onto a campus, and it's oddly visceral, their reactions. It's kind of like, yeah, I can see myself here, or heck no, get me out of here kind of situation. I've heard stories of parents where they've driven into a parking lot, and the kid's like, I'm not going here. And they're like, we're in a parking lot. And the kid's like, don't care, not going here. So it's just a little odd about that. But, being able to walk onto those campuses and be able to, kind of get the feeling for it. It's like, what am I looking for here? Do I want to be also, the setting? Do I want to be in a city? Do I want to be in a Suffolk University where the city is your campus, or a Northeastern where the city is your campus? Do I want to be a UMass where it has its own very large campus? Figuring that kind of stuff out. Location, most of our students, I will say, are New England, and then the Eastern Seaboard tend to be the bulk of it. We do get some who go farther away. We've had, even last year, a few who went abroad. But by and large, the bulk tend to narrow it down to the Northeast. And then, and past couple of years, I feel like it's been a lot of the Carolinas, Florida, warm places. those are gaining speed. Every year we get kind of outliers. Tennessee's been popular. A couple years ago, University of West Virginia came out of nowhere that there was a bulk of kids that were really interested in that. And again, cost and financial aid. Also what majors they're looking for, because not every college has every major, so not all schools have engineering schools, not all schools have nursing programs, things like that. So if they have a particular major in mind, they need to figure out which schools have those majors. Also, it's important to kind of realize some colleges will call the same thing different things. So it might be data science, it might be data analytics, it might be business analytics, it might be kind of the same thing, but kind of called different things. So oftentimes we'll suggest they go in and when they're doing their searches, kind of try a few things to check it out, to make sure they're getting all the schools that are possible. Admissions criteria. That's going to be something that's very important for them to look at to determine whether they're really admittable to a school. And it's hard to know. And there are so many great kids and so many great kids with such great scores, but nowadays there's a lot of kids with a lot of great scores and things like that. So kind of being reasonable and making sure that they're choosing schools that are a good match for them. It's fine to have a reach, it's fine to have, what we used to call a safety, but most of them should be good match schools, that they are academically matched for those schools. Housing options, I know we've in the past often talked about UMass Boston has finally built a dormitory. They didn't have dormitories, so it was one of those deals where they had an office that would help students find apartments together. But now they have a freshman dormitory. So making sure you're aware of the housing options. I went to Northeastern way long ago when you would go for freshman year, and after that they kicked everybody off campus basically. They had no housing. My husband, who also went there, lived on the Emmanuel campus because the kids were living in the YMCA, Emmanuel, because they didn't have enough housing. So just being aware of what those options are. And then sports and activities, if they are planning on getting recruited, they should start talking to coaches soon. I would say that's something that they're thinking D1, D2, they should be in those talks right now, definitely for sure. And then any kind of specialized options such as like co-ed schools, single sex, fraternities, sororities, religious affiliations, and disability support. The way that we help these students do these searches, our number one way is Naviance, and that's what Mr. Fitzgerald's going to be showing you next with our super match. College Board, the same place they go to register for the SATs. That is another great site that they can do college searches on as well. Schools Direct website, so that's something that they can go to the websites and look around on there to get all sorts of information. Also, just to note, if you do want to visit a college, you're going to go to their college website, go to the admissions tab, and oftentimes they will have a little calendar where you can plan your visit to them. You usually need to register to visit a college, so you'll pick your date, your time. A lot of times it's like 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. kind of feel. They usually have them around those times to go on your tour of the school. If you're thinking of doing a break week, like February break or April break, book those quick. Because especially the April break, sometimes if you're thinking you're doing it the week before, they might be all booked. It doesn't stop you from walking around the campus if you're nearby, but you just won't get the official tour. We have a couple national college fairs in Providence in April, Boston May 2nd and 3rd, and virtual, they have them as well. And then for technical and trade schools, our website does have links to a lot of the local ones, including the Southeastern Technical Institute, but also some other ones more specific for like electricians and things like that. And then connecting with schools via Instagram or Twitter, but we also, always warn the students that you better clean up any of your social media if you're going to be linking to any colleges through social media, because schools do sometimes look at that. So to make sure that they don't have anything that's questionable on their social media. So now we're going to show you the nuts and bolts of Naviance with Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you very much. Go over here. As I'm talking, Ms. Carney is going to kind of behind me be navigating Naviance in real time to kind of walk you through some of the features. So as we're meeting with students, currently I think Ms. Mancuso mentioned, we've started the process of meeting with our juniors. I know we've met with many, we still have many to meet with. One of the things that we're doing is helping them many times remember that they have an Naviance account and then making sure they know how to access it. One of the benefits of Naviance is that there's a very useful college search tool built into it. There are other features in Naviance that also can be helpful for a lot of students, especially if you have a student who maybe is still very much unsure about the direction they want to go, right? So whether that's a career field in general or just broader, like the conversation's just like, I have no idea, versus I know I want to go to college and I have some idea, now I need to narrow my list down. So in Naviance, at the top of the screen, and Mrs. Carney's kind of hovering over it, there is a self-discovery tab with about a half a dozen different interest inventories. All of them take about 20 to 25 minutes, and all of them ultimately generate a list of career suggestions for students based on how they respond to those interest inventories, with kind of ideas on careers that could be a good match, and as well as additional information perhaps about themselves, at least based on how they responded to the questions within those inventories. I think personally, there's a personality inventory and a career interest inventory. They tend to, I think, generate some of the best results. The feedback in there then links to the careers tab, which also is available on the main page as well. So all the careers are then hyperlinked, and a student can access information about a given career in Naviance. It gives a pretty thorough description of job responsibilities associated with those careers, earning potential associated with those careers that they pull from the Occupational Outlook Handbook, and they do a pretty good job of kind of showing earning potential as far as like low-end, high-end, and median salary, both nationally and then by state, so kids could see sort of what they might expect to make in a certain career field, both nationally, but also if they were to say stay in Massachusetts. And then also in the Times, in the career section, they will mention college majors that could be a good fit for that given career, if it's a career that perhaps requires a 4-year college degree. Ultimately, as we're talking with kids and showing them and walking them through Naviance, kind of our goal is to get them over to the colleges tab. The colleges tab in Naviance is going to be where they probably are going to do most of their search work over the next several months. So there are several tools and features in Naviance under kind of on the far left-hand side of the screen where it says Find Your Fit. I think in most of our eyes, the very first option, which is called the Supermatch College Search, is probably the most helpful to start. Essentially, it's a very robust search engine where kids can put in criteria about what they're looking for out of their college experience, and ultimately, they will generate a matching list of schools that fit that criteria. So as Ms. Carney's kind of going across, she can identify location and indicate as she scrolls down, perhaps she wants to look by region, and we can maybe look in the Northeast to keep them relatively close to home. And as she scrolls further down, we could say we want to perhaps make sure that the school is in or near a city. So Ms. Carney's going to identify that she's looking for schools that are either in a large or small city or near a large or a small city. And then if we go back up, Ms. Carney could look under academics, and like she had mentioned, kids could search for specific majors. Like was mentioned, the major search process can be a little misleading because kids might search for a specific major, and a given college might have a very similar major to what they're thinking of, but with a slightly different name. So it is helpful to use the academic search tab, but I also don't think it needs to be the end-all be-all for a lot of kids. So even for now, we can maybe, we'll pick accounting because it's first alphabetically. But it's worth, like Ms. Carney had mentioned, maybe manipulating this a little bit. What we really try and encourage kids to do is kind of go back and forth and kind of play with this a little bit to generate different ideas for themselves. It's not sort of a one-and-done exercise. When they go to the admissions tab, what they'll be able to find is they'll be able to search based on general admissions criteria. Okay, so most of these tabs are about students finding colleges that feel like the colleges are a good fit for them. This is a mechanism where they also can try and make sure they're, at least academically speaking, a reasonably good fit for the college. And so we can maybe look at schools that are accepting, say, the mid criteria of selectivity. 50 to 75, and 26 to 50% of the students who apply. Right now, we're using sort of a made-up student that Ms. Carney and I, the other counselors, created. It's not a real student's account. But when your kids log in, one of the things they'll also be able to see is their OA GPA as it currently stands, based on our GPA scale. And one of the things we'll eventually be able to see is they'll be able to then compare their GPA to the average GPA of admitted students at some of these schools, just again to make sure that it feels like, to at least a certain extent, the schools they're identifying feel like a reasonably good fit academically for them. And then they can, if they would like, search by SAT scores. I'm not going to do that for the time being. But if we go up to student life, we can search by certain clubs or organizations. We can maybe see, maybe they have marching band. Yeah, they do. Shout out to our marching band. And there are other factors as well, right? Like to make sure maybe that you have a child who's interested in an ROTC program. You can search to make sure that the school has an ROTC program. Maybe wanting to make sure that they specifically identify having internship or co-op opportunities. If we go a little further back up under diversity, kids can search by a lot of criteria around diversity. At a minimum, they can maybe make sure that they're identifying colleges where they would be admissible to, based on like perhaps the gender concentration, right? So we, for the time being, maybe can look at co-ed colleges. And students could look at and filter based on percentage criteria, whether it's male-female student ratio, ethnicity breakdown of kind of the student body, as well as a whole bunch of other factors, including religious affiliation, the percentage of out-of-state students attending that given college, and I'll go one more over to institutional characteristics. And they can search for criteria like making sure that they're looking at 2-year schools versus 4-year schools. For now, we're going to look at exclusively 4-year schools, so we'll unselect the 2-year option. We can also look at, like was mentioned, public versus private schools. We can look at, and a lot of kids like to identify schools based on the size. Like I feel like that for a lot of kids initially is a real, like a high priority, or feels like for a lot of kids a high priority criteria item, where they get to a point where they feel like a school feels too big or too small perhaps. We'll, for the sake of doing it, look at maybe very large, and mid-sized schools. We'll kind of target some of the bigger ones. And if Ms. Carney scrolls down a little, we'll want to make sure they offer on-campus housing. And then if you want to select off just to the side, Ms. Carney, what eventually happens if you want to scroll down is they get a list of schools that match that criteria. Now, if they are so selective, what ends up happening is they might get to a point where they are so selective that they don't have a school that fits, and like they have 0 schools that 100% match their search criteria. So we kind of tell kids, we want you to be choosy, we don't want you to be so choosy that you basically don't have a single school that sort of fits what you're looking for, right? But what you'll see, and kind of what you're seeing up above is, initially it tells you schools that are 100% match. And then underneath it, tells you schools that are a certain percentage, high percentage match, likely meaning they fit almost everything but are missing something. And if you click Y, it'll basically tell you sort of what didn't fit for that particular school and what did. So, right, so Ms. Carney identified a school, and the one thing that wasn't a match was the acceptance rate. Everything else was a good fit. And so then if we click on a given school, and are we near, what are we near, BC? Let's go Eagles. So if Ms. Carney clicks on Boston College, what we end up seeing is a page in Naviance that's specifically dedicated with information about BC. And so Naviance, for kids that are using it, becomes a very helpful tool because they get used to knowing where to find out information about a college. And kind of that information will exist in the same place as they toggle from one school to another. So on the main page of a school site in Naviance, it's going to give you some general data. It's going to tell you the average cost of attendance, and it's adjustable based on your income. As you might imagine, the higher your family's income, likely the higher the cost of attendance would be for that given school. It talks about acceptance rate, graduation rate. The college overlap data can sometimes be really helpful for a kid. That's going to give them other schools that students from OA that Research BC also looked into, right? So it's not necessarily to say they're an exact match for all the same reasons that perhaps your child is interested in that school, but sometimes for some kids, it's a helpful way to introduce other schools that perhaps could be a good fit that they hadn't necessarily considered yet. Further on down, on the main page, what they'll find is basically a quick blurb about the college and then some basic data points about what that school is, the size of the school. Sometimes if it's a public or private schools, like was mentioned, could have a religious affiliation. BC does, so it references that it's a Roman Catholic school. And then if you look across the top, they'll be able to click on information about studies, where it'll tell them all the majors that are offered BC, as well as the most popular general areas of study at BC. It'll also, under student life, tell them, and like we knew BC had accounting, because that was part of how we built our list. But it tells us all the other majors that were there. Under student life, it's going to give us a lot of data points about kind of who goes there and what your child's experience might be as a member of that school community. So it tells you how big the student population is, how far away it is from the nearest city, if it is, right? So BC is 6 miles away from Boston. It tells you to the mile how far away it is from OA. Which is very fun when a kid tells us like they want to go to UCLA, and like we look it up and it's like 2,568 miles or something like that away. It tells us how many students live on campus, and then like Ms. Carney was showing you, then there are kind of pie charts that give you information about the demographics of the college, the ethnicity data of the student body, the male-female breakdown of the student body, how many students are over 24 versus 18 to 23, kind of traditionally college age. It gives you information about how many students attend that school who live in that state, right? So how many BC students are from Massachusetts versus out of state, and how many students are international students. So it maybe helps your kids start to paint a picture of what their experience at the school might be like relative to who else goes there. And then if you look at the admissions data, it gives us data points, essentially a portion of an XY graph, where this chart, which I know looks a little overwhelming on the screen, is essentially information about past OA students that applied to that school and reported their decisions back. So the way it works is I'm going to do this hopefully correctly, on the y-axis, which is the one that goes up and down, we have OA GPA. And then on the x-axis, the one that goes across, we have SAT scores. And then there's a legend underneath that tells us what basically the data points mean. But as you might imagine, green is good, red is bad. Green means the student reported that they were accepted. X's mean, unfortunately, they reported that they did not get in. And circles mean that they were waitlisted, and colleges sometimes do that as well. And when you come back, if you come back in the fall for the senior workshop, we'll talk more about sort of the admissions decision process. But the gist of it is sometimes colleges don't say yes or no, they say maybe. And really what they're saying is we're going to wait until probably the summer after senior year, once they've gotten all their decisions back about who's actually going to attend. If they end up having room available that they didn't anticipate, they go to their wait list. But oftentimes our students aren't communicating to us at that point what the final decision was because they graduated and they're gone. So what your children also will see that we don't have because our student is not real, is that they will exist in this scattergram as a data point that's basically like is being shown to you right now, a silhouette of a person. So that based on their GPA and initially their PSAT scores, if they took them, and eventually their SAT scores, if they take them, they'll kind of be populated within this scattergram. And the points we make to kids is, this is not an exact science, okay? Every one of these data points is a person, a student that has a story, that has information about themselves that goes beyond sort of their academic profile. And colleges do take a holistic review of a student's application. At the same time, typically what colleges will tell you and will tell us is some of the more important pieces of information they initially are looking at are the student's academics, their transcript, the courses they took, the grades they got, and how that translated to a GPA. So we show this to kids not to scare them away from applying to a given school, and we're not going to discourage them from applying to any given school if they are really interested in applying there. But it's really meant to be a mechanism to try and give them a little bit more of an apples-to-apples comparison. By that I mean, allowing them to compare their application chances against other OA students who applied to that school and reported their decision back to us, to get a reasonable idea of what it might look like for them to potentially be admitted to that given school, okay? And what was mentioned, or what we talked about a little bit more, Ms. Mancuso, I know highlighted a little bit, when kids are looking at the SAT data, what you're gonna hear about is a lot of schools are test optional. They don't necessarily require students provide their SAT scores when they apply. So we really emphasize to kids that if you are gonna kind of put more weight on one of these data points than another, probably the GPA portion is a little more important than the test scores portion, because we don't know in this graph if the students even submitted their SAT scores to the college and asked the college to consider their SAT scores when they were evaluating them, okay? But all of this is meant to be a mechanism to try and help introduce colleges to students. The end goal eventually is to get your students to go to the school's website, okay? That's really kind of what we want them to ultimately do. As we're talking with kids, sometimes kids say to us already, like, I know a school I'm interested in already. Well, they can cut right to the chase and just go to that school's website. On a school's website, what Ms. Carney had mentioned, what you're going to be able to find is information on how to visit and learn more about that school directly. Certainly, I think one of the reasons we're trying to do this early in the process is to give everyone, students and families, the opportunity to really plan out the next several months. Not feel overwhelmed, not feel rushed, but still feel like you have the opportunity to learn more about colleges or postgraduate opportunities around your schedule. Okay, so colleges really do try and make themselves accessible. When you go on the school's website, they typically have a visit link directly on the main page. If it's not on the main page, it typically exists under the undergraduate admissions tab, which would be on the main page. And through there, visit opportunities are always free. Almost always, there are daily visit opportunities that you can schedule literally any day of the week, Monday through Friday, and oftentimes on Saturdays. And then many times, there are more nuanced ways to visit that perhaps are offered less frequently. There might be an opportunity to visit on a certain day and learn more about a specific program at a school. You'll learn more about the nursing major or the School of Business. You might not be able to do that at every day, but there might be certain specific days that you can do that. And so the advice we're trying to give to kids is, we want you, when you go and visit a school, to students, and I guess to you guys now, to have that feel like it's as meaningful a visit as possible based on what your kids are thinking about, at least up until this point, right? So there might even be opportunities to schedule time or connect with someone from the marching band while they go there, or hear from someone from disability services, if that might be part of your child's experience in college. Many schools offer spring or fall open houses that are really sort of when the college makes themselves most available. And those are really probably the best days to go if you can, but they're perhaps only offered once or twice a year. And so it's okay if you can't do those. But certainly, once they have schools in mind, we want them to try and get to the school's website so that they can start learning more about the schools directly through their website and eventually ultimately get on campus. The other thing that you'll find, especially if you have a child who's looking at schools farther away, is schools have a lot of virtual visit opportunities as well. So that if they want to learn more about a school, but you can't necessarily conveniently schedule a tour because it's in California, you're not necessarily going to immediately take a flight out to Los Angeles, they can probably do a lot online, directly interacting with the college to learn more about the school, to decide perhaps if it is somewhere that they want to apply first, see if they're admitted and then visit, or perhaps if they want to talk to you about, is this somewhere that over one of the vacation weeks or over the summer, you want to schedule a family road trip and you do want to see if it is a situation where your child is looking at a search radius that sort of extends beyond New England or beyond sort of a drivable distance. The other feature that we were talking about is College Board, and I'm not going to go through the whole search process in College Board, but I would just highlight that College Board has a lot of the same features as Naviance. It has a college search tool, and you can look up schools directly as well. The one aspect of College Board that I think sometimes can be helpful that Naviance doesn't have, it gives you general admissions data. So Naviance will tell you OA specific data as far as admissions chances are concerned. College Board can give you admissions data that's more general to their overall acceptance due they'll tell you, like sort of show you a scale of, you know, this percentage of students were accepted with this GPA. Their average SAT range is between this and this. So that sometimes, especially if it's a school where we haven't had a lot of kids apply to in past years, College Board can be a very useful tool that sort of try to assess a student's admissibility or admission chances at a given place. And then, if I can have you, Ms. Carney, and this is sort of the pieces that I was talking about within College Board. In Naviance, the only other thing we wanted to show and highlight to you is that eventually we will go with your students through the process of the nuts and bolts of how they're going to apply. And we mention this now only because part of that process is getting recommendation letters. And the counselors, all of us, will write recommendation letters for every single student that is applying to college. We'll also go through the process later this spring, when we meet with them a second time, of how they can ask teachers or outside folks for recommendation letters as well. But in Naviance, there is a tool for us under, and Ms. Carney's kind of showing you where it lives right now, under kind of when we highlight their name, there's a section that says surveys and surveys from their school, where there will be a college questionnaire that we ask students to complete, all right? And we point this out to you tonight because we mentioned it to your kids, not to your kids specifically, but to kids from previous grades. And sometimes we have to remind them several times or ask them several times to complete this for us. And it ends up being a very helpful tool for us to write a recommendation letter that ultimately does justice to them, right? We have a lot of graduating seniors. Many of them are applying to places and applying to schools roughly around the same time, so ultimately then we are writing a lot of recommendation letters in a very close amount of time, and we want those letters to be accurate and authentic and as unique as possible. So as well as we hopefully know your students, or as well as your students might think we know them, we don't necessarily know everything about what their high school experience has been. We don't necessarily know everything that they want us to know. So this becomes then an opportunity for them to share with us everything they would want us to know. So when we sit down to write the letter of recommendation, we have all the information we would want to have. And later there will also be an opportunity for you all as parents and guardians to fill out a survey or a questionnaire as well. It's not something we introduced tonight because it's not an urgent part of the process, but since you're here, we mention it. That you all will be able to give us feedback too, and that feedback is very helpful in the recommendation part of the process. Because sometimes your kids, even when they do fill this out, aren't as long-winded as we might want them to be. And sometimes don't mention things that perhaps they should have relative to what their high school experience has been, what we want colleges to know about them. Okay? So with all that being said, that's sort of how we're working with them currently. As we're meeting with them, we're going through the search process and really emphasizing to them that we want them to try and feel like they're building a list and visiting schools over the next several months. But at this point, I think I'm going to invite Mr. Smith up to talk a little bit more about the testing part of the process, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you. I'm going to go this way a little bit. I'm talking about standardized testing today. It's changed a lot over the last couple of years, especially if you've ever gone through this process at any point about, I'm talking about the SAT and the ACT. About 30 years ago, it was a requirement for everybody who wanted to go to college to submit your SAT scores. About 20 years ago, they introduced this test optional policy. And then over COVID time, it became kind of the Wild West, where a lot of places, most places, became test optional, and it became more of a conversation, and it's a whole lot less, standardized test is a whole lot less relevant of a conversation than it maybe was 30 years ago, but in a lot of cases, it still might matter. So I'm going to go over each of these questions, and I might flip a little back and forth just to summarize what we're looking at when we're talking about standardized testing and how it matters or why it matters. College Board, again, we've mentioned it a few times, but it's a primary place where you can research the SAT. The SAT is the primary one in the Northeast that most colleges in this area look to as the go-to test. The SAT itself, you can see some of the dates up there. These are kind of revolving over time, so there'll be some opportunities to take it for your student as a junior, and then more opportunities to take it at the start of their senior year. Our typical advice is that students should be trying to take it maybe one time at the end of junior year and one time at the start of senior year. Again, it's different for every student along the way, but most of your students have taken the PSAT either as a 10th grader or an I experienced test anxiety. As I did when I was in high school, this never reflected the best version of myself, so it was never something that I really honed in on. But I'll talk more about that in a second. The ACT is an alternative test. I did a little better with the ACT because it's a little different and has a science section attached to it. The SAT does not have the same thing. It's hosted by a different service. It's a different website, which again I'll show you in a second. SAT uses College Board. ACT uses actstudent.org. They're both websites you just go to and your student signs up, and there's a fee to take the test in most cases. You can see the test dates here. Again, they're both pretty similar. The only difference is this is a score that a student's going to get back as a, I got a 35 on my ACT versus a 1600 on my SAT. And they mean different things to colleges, and this is largely used kind of in the southern states and a lot more widely out west, whereas in the Northeast we tend to be an SAT-focused place for whatever reason. I was not a great test taker in high school, so I tried the SAT, didn't love it. I took this, I did a little better, still didn't love it, and I ended up going to a test-optional school, which I'll talk more about now. So back to the original questions. Should you take both? I did because I wasn't happy with my first performance. Most students here aren't taking the ACT on a regular basis. Most students will try the SAT 1, 2, 3 times. And then usually at that point, that's a lot of times to take a 3-hour test. How many times should you take them? The statistics behind the SAT itself, students improve from the PSAT to the SAT first take. If they take it a second time, that second take usually tends to be the peak of the SAT data-wise. They say your score kind of plateaus if you try to take it a third, fourth, fifth time, which I've had students do and honestly drive themselves crazy doing it. And a lot of my conversation with students are, if this is a test that really frustrates you, you live in a world that's test optional now, and you live in a world where you can focus on your extracurriculars, and you can focus on your grade in your honors biology class, and this doesn't have to be a source of stress. So my question is always, is this worth the stress that it's creating for you? And that'll be a question that I think a lot of us will have with you if we notice the same thing in your student as well. How are they used by schools? Mr. Fitzgerald mentioned this, but 30 years ago, it was the SAT was the primary thing they looked at, and then they looked at grades and extracurriculars. It's kind of flipped, where GPA and grades and the rigor of your classes that you take here at school, that tends to be the top indicator. Your involvement, your extracurriculars, your sports, whatever that may be, that tends to come in second place. The SATs fall further down this list than they have in a very long time. So if your student is like me and needs to deprioritize a stress-inducing test, it is more okay now than it's ever been. And in fact, I encourage it a lot of times. In terms of taking the test itself, the important thing to know is that if your student is going to be a nursing major or biology or pre-med, some of those may not be as likely to be test optional. A lot of the times, some of those majors at BU or BC might want to see that SAT just because you are in a more rigorous program. You are being held against pre-med standards for the most part. So they might have different requirements as it relates to is the SAT required or not. When do you send them to schools? Right around the time you apply. So when students are this year, seniors, when they were applying on November 15th for some of those early nursing deadlines, students were simultaneously sending in the SAT scores at the same time. And what's the difference between test optional and test blind? Test optional means that you can send them, you cannot send them. And a few schools are like this, like Fairfield, where I went, is like this, where if you send them, we'll look at your scores, and if we like them, it'll help you a lot. On the other end of things, if you don't send your scores, we're not going to hold it against you. And that's what test optional means. How true that is, I mean, it's impossible for anyone to tell, but in my case at least, I know that it did what I wanted it to do, and test optional is something I encourage pretty regularly. And then test blind is, we don't care if you send them, we don't care if you don't send them, we're not looking at them. So you won't see that terminology in a lot of places right now, but know that there are more test optional colleges than there's kind of ever been. The website here, this is actstudent.org. This is where you sign up for the ACT if it is an alternative, or your student is, I've have separate costs to them. It changes every year. They're both right around 50, or I think it's $60 this year. Is that right? $60. And each time you take it, it is that $60 payment. And then on top of that, if you go to send your score to a college, that also costs money as an additional piece. So let's say I scored a 1,500 on the SAT and it really helps my application and I want to send it to Tufts, it's going to cost me $12 on a college board to send that SAT to Tufts. So there's a couple of costs associated with it both ways. If your student is kind of dead set on, I want to do well on this test, it would really help me. A lot of the really elite schools still want to see the SAT, even if they don't outright say it. Some of the students that I've had this year go to some really elite schools had some really elite SAT scores too. And the SAT and ACT prep that's available, it comes by our desk on a regular basis. So if there's a new test prep class coming in, we usually will blast out, hey, here's a test prep program that's available to you and your student. The most commonly used ones, number one, Khan Academy. It's an online platform where students can kind of just click around and take practice test questions. The site is connected with College Board. It also connects with the PSAT if your student took it initially. So it can kind of read out, okay, you scored at this point on the PSAT, let's pick it up where your weak points were. And Khan Academy personalizes it to the students who do it, or who took the test, and personalizes it as you go, and that's a free service. ACT has its own online service. It's $40. Most of these other ones will have costs associated with them. If you are somebody who wants your students to see it in person, not this virtual stuff, type of prep, those are available as well. Bridgewater State has a pretty reliable one. $325, it seems like a hefty amount to pay, but in the test prep world, that's kind of a decently priced option. And then Princeton Review and Kaplan Test Prep, those are the expensive options. Those are the ones that, I mean, they're personalized coaches, they're one-on-one tutoring. That's going to come at a much higher rate than the $325 from Bridgewater State. But I do have a lot of students who have taken advantage of both, and both preps can be done through those websites. So it's Princeton Review SAT Prep, and then the same with Kaplan Test Prep. Again, that is well upwards of $325, so just be prepared for that price tag if that is an option that you're looking into. And with that, I'm going to hand off applications and the actual process to Ms. Lukovich.
Thank you. Okay, so now that everyone is very overwhelmed, I'm here to tell you this is not as overwhelming as it sounds. It's actually a pretty simple process to apply to college. The hardest part would be writing your college essay. The kids get help with that from their English teachers. You can Google that at home over the summer. Common App essay questions. And there are 7 or 8 choices. You choose the one you want, and one is even topic of your own choice. So the kids write a nice essay. They can even use an essay they did junior year in high school. They apply, which is basically filling out a form. They ask the teacher for recommendation. They fill out the questionnaire. We write the recommendation, and bang. So they will be frantic about this, and I urge you not to feed into the frantic environment that exists around college applications. Everyone that wants to go to college can and will go to college. Everyone can get in somewhere. There are 1,000,001 options, public, private. Even if you didn't do well in high school, you can start at a community college and you can transfer, and it does not hold you back in any way. You can all go to college, not you, your kids. So the ways to apply, everything is done online. Most common is the common application. Over 1,000 schools in the country use it. It's commonapp.org. That's the one that you look up your essay. You're going to write one essay and apply to 10 or whatever many colleges you want to apply to. So you're really filling out one application. Then you're going to answer some separate questions for each college, but they're not typically that bad. Some of the higher end schools will ask a little separate essay, that sort of thing. But a lot of the regular schools, it's going to be just your one essay and a few short questions. If you are in the simplest thing to do is do that one. There are a few schools that are not on the common application, or we also have kids that apply to so many schools, they run out of space on the common app because there is a limit. So then you can apply directly on the website for the college. Right here? Okay. My tech expert. So this is commonapp.org. We run a workshop in the summer, staffed mostly by Mrs. Carney and Mr. Fitzgerald. And the kids can come and bring their laptop, or we have Chromebooks. We have a free 2-day workshop where they can get started on this. And it's not that you can't do it on your own, but it's a nice jump start. It kind of makes you do it. You show up, and it's very loose. You can come and go. You can come for an hour. You can come for 4 hours. We'll have a sign-up sheet for that in the spring, and it's a really nice way to kind of kickstart in the fall and be ready for your workshop. Ready for your applications. So the types of decisions and how you apply to college. Early decision is one that not that many students do. Early decision means you're picking one college that you really are positive you want to go to. You're signing a contract agreement, and the counselor is signing it too, and the parents are signing it too, saying, if I get into Boston University, I promise I'll go there. Most people don't do that. Some athletes do it if they're recruited. The coach will ask them to sign an early decision agreement, and they're happy to do so because they're pretty sure they're getting in. Other ways people use it are, if your family went there and you absolutely want it and you're not overly concerned about the money, then sometimes people use that. Early action is the one that is most typically used by students at this school. So what it means is you apply early, meaning usually by November 1st, sometimes November 15th, sometimes December 1st. But you don't have to tell them your decision until May, which is really the best of both worlds, because you've gotten it over with, you're getting your answer usually by December 31st or January. So like right now, our seniors are starting the year, and they feel very relieved. And now they can go visit on Accepted Students Day, they can visit during February, April vacation, they can take their time, they can weigh the financial aid offers, you can make a little spreadsheet at home, and you can say, well, this school gave me this much money, and this gave me that much money, and I'm going to visit, and I'm going to see where I want to go. So I love that one. We all love that one, except for the fact that we have to write 55 letters of recommendation by November 1st. Regular decision is the same thing, but it's usually by January 1st. Some schools, some of the higher end schools, don't offer early action. For example, the Ivy League schools offer early decision, the one where it's binding, or regular decision. So for some of our real high-end students, that's always a big decision. Should I apply early decision to this famous college because maybe it will up my chances by X percent? So some kids with their families decide to do that, but if you don't get in, you have to be ready to send those other ones right away by January 1st. So it's a real balance and a real family decision. So regular decision, you will apply by January. You probably won't hear till March or April, and you'll have to turn around that decision by May 1st for your schools. Some kids do both. Some early action, some regular decision. Rolling admissions, it's becoming a little less common, but what it means is they accept students as they apply. So like Quinnipiac is an example of that. You apply in August, they'll tell you in 3 weeks. And the deadline for that would be very late on paper, but it's not really late because they are accepting kids throughout the whole process. So they actually could run out of room and or money if you're looking for, financial aid or scholarship money. Okay. So the FAFSA, you've all heard about that. This is the free application for federal student aid, and the CSS profile has been more in use this year because because of, it's an additional financial aid application. Again, through the College Board, and of course, there's a fee, because that's all they do, is charge fees for every single thing. But the FAFSA is free, and it's used by every single college in the United States. You don't have to fill it out if you don't want any money at all, but most people do want money. And you have to fill it out even if you're going to get, for example, a federal loan. And if you think, like, I'm not going to qualify for need-based aid, but I do need those loans. And the reason to consider the federal student loans is because of their flexibility. It's not just a bank loan. If you're going to borrow money to send your student to college, and most people do, the Stafford loan is a great loan because it's automatically offered to every student without regard to income, family income, and it's flexible in that you can start paying it back while the student's in school, but you don't have to until after they graduate. You can pay the interest. Also, if your student graduates and they don't have a job, they can postpone the payments or they can pay according to their income. And you've heard a lot of this on the news. You know, some people can halt the payments or just pay $25 a month because they don't have a job yet, and then when they get a better job, they pay a higher amount. And then these are the loans that, if they're not consolidated, have been forgiven by the federal government for some students. One of the biggest reasons they're forgiven is public service. Like if your student becomes a public school teacher or even a private school teacher, if you become a teacher or you work in education in any way, a percentage can be forgiven. If you go in the Peace Corps, a percentage can be forgiven. So I would say if you're going to borrow, it's a great way to borrow. And it certainly is not going to be the whole amount, that's for sure. It's a set amount every year, and it goes up every year in school. What is it now, like the total? Is it 25 or is it more like up to? It used to start at like, how much does a freshman get? Like 5,000?
Yeah.
5,000 for freshman, 5,500, and then sophomore year you get a little bit more, junior year a little bit more. And like some year if you have the money, you don't have to take it. It's not an obligation, but it's just a nice option. So the FAFSA this year has been delayed, but when your kids apply, it's going to go back to October 1st. So it will be open on October 1st, so they can kind of you can start filling that out. This is really going to be your job more than your kids, because it ties into your taxes. It ties into your taxes, and it's from the year before. We will have a financial aid night in the fall to help you with all that stuff. Okay. And this is Susan to end it up. Thank you. So all of this tonight is to say, and this is the big takeaways, we want you and your students to start having the conversations about what their plans are, because we want you guys to be on the same page. There are times where we've had conversations with parents and students and they're not on the same page. So we want you guys to start having the conversations, if you haven't already, about what their plan is. And if it is college, which I imagine because you're here tonight, the goal will be over the next several months to do research. Start figuring out what they like, what they don't like. Utilize the search engines to give them some ideas. That's really the big goal. The next thing will be, as a family, figuring out when to take tours. We know it takes time, potentially, travel and money to do these things, so work out what's going to be best for you. February and April vacation are great times to go. We're not in session, but colleges are. If that works for you, great. Otherwise, weekends, in the summer or even in the fall, that's fine. As long as we really encourage, if you're able to get on campus, that is the big thing. And then the third takeaway tonight is deciding on signing up for an SAT or an ACT, okay? The SAT will be running in March, May, and June. Anyone can do the March one. I would say though, if your child is in pre-calc or an advanced math, March is fine. If your kiddo is in Algebra 2, I would hold off until May or June when they have more math under their belt. I will mention that the June SAT conflicts with OA graduation. So if anybody is planning on being at OA graduation, June date probably won't work. So I just want to put that out there. And then the test will run again in August, October, and November. So even if your child is thinking about an early deadline, even October and November will still be okay for them to get their scores in if that's what their plan is. If they are thinking about August, I would suggest trying to sign up sooner rather than later because there are limited locations offering that August test date, just an FYI, okay? Other than that, for the other months, there's usually plenty of options available in terms of locations. So researching schools, taking tours, signing up for an college entrance exam, those are the big three. So now until the summer, keep your grades up. You know, I think the kids recognize this, they know junior year, it's a big year, but we remind them that 9th and 10th grade did count, and we will be sending first and second quarter grades from senior year as well. So they're gonna shine it on a little bit longer, but that's a key thing. We talked about scheduling the testing, researching the colleges. Over the summer, visiting if you can. The common application that Mrs. Lukovich referenced, that will not open until July. So they can create an account now if they want, but they won't be able to start using the application they need until July. The one currently in use is for current seniors, so just an FYI on that. And then again, we will post the dates for the Common App Workshop in late May, early June. So kids can sign up. And it's very flexible. Kids can email us over the summer too to say like, hey, I didn't sign up, can I join now? Great. The essay, as Mrs. Lukovich mentioned, you can Google, Common App essay prompts. You'll see the different essays available. This past summer when we did the Common App workshop, we had one of our senior English teachers come in for the day and talk about the essay with them. And then the senior English teachers will either require it as an assignment in class, or at the very least they will talk to the students about it, and then they can make appointments to sit with the teacher and have them edit or critique their essay. And then the fall will really be the process of thinking about what deadlines they're applying for, early action, early decision, regular decision. We will meet with them right away in September, and we'll go from there. And then you may have heard this year, there's been a lot of change and turmoil with the financial aid process with FAFSA, but that's for this year only. They have realigned their format and their questions, and it didn't launch until December 30th. But fortunately for you folks, they are working out the kinks so that when you're ready to go, it will reopen again October 1st without issue, knock on wood. And we'll talk more about financial aid later in the fall, okay? But we wanted to make sure we gave you this information, just as we've mentioned, so you can start planning out what you want to do, what your timeline looks like. Just get your ducks in a row. We're also happy to meet with you as well, so if any parents are anxious and still have questions and want to meet with us in person, we're more than welcome to, we're happy to do that. We will see them again late May, early June before they leave. At that time, we'll talk about letters of recommendation, the essay, deadlines, the Common App workshop, things like that. Not that we can't see them in between now and then, certainly we can, but just so you know, we will have another, almost like an exit meeting at the end of the year to kind of prep them, see where they're at, and then talk about summer to-dos, okay? Is that the last slide? Okay. All right, so now we'll open it up to questions, if anyone has any that they want to ask. Yes? How long does it take to get the results back from SATs? About 2.5 weeks. Yep, it's pretty quick now that everything's digital. So it's a quick turnaround. So you can look at them and then decide what you want to do, if your student wants to sign up again, or if they're good with them, or whatever it may be. Okay. Anybody else? Yes?
Is the Naviance already set up for students?
Yes, they already have their Naviance accounts. So those have already been created. When we do meet with them individually, we go back in and make sure that they can reset if they need to, or if they know how to log on and everything like that. So we don't have parent ones, so if you do want to go in, you'll have to access through your student's account. Okay? Yes?
What's the difference between early decision versus early action?
Early decision, early action? Yep. So early decision is that binding agreement. So what you're saying is you're committing to that school. So early just means that their deadline could be November 1st or 15th or December 1st. Those are usually the standard early deadlines. But the early decision means you are committing to that school, you're withdrawing all of your other applications, and if you get in, they're committing to attending that college. Now, that's great, but you won't know your financial aid package either. So you're going, it's a big decision in knowing if you're gonna do early decision or not, because you have to figure out, can we afford this financially? If you can, fantastic. But that's why we encourage kids, if they can, to do early action, because they're not bound to anything. They can still apply to other schools, look at their financial aid packages, and then make a decision. I will say that most colleges are still taking a smaller percentage from that early decision and early action pool. The majority of their decisions will come in that regular decision pool. Now, if students are not accepted during early decision or early action, they have the choice of being rolled into the regular decision pool and being evaluated again. Okay. Unless they're UMass Amherst, who for this year, for some reason, if you were declined, you were declined. They didn't roll you in. At the admissions office, the student will receive a letter saying, you applied early action, you are not accepted at this point, but we are going to reevaluate you again during the regular decision pool. Okay, but I can't give you exact percentages, but I will tell you that still it's a small percentage that come from that early decision or early action pool.
I would add too, if a college offers early decision and early action, typically if they offer both, they will likely share their admissions percentages with you. It's not meant to be a secret. So if you say were to go to an admissions event and the admissions representative is talking about the way students can apply, they probably can tell you sort of the difference in your student chances if they were to apply early action versus early decision.
Early action is nice though, because for some kids who just want to get it done with, they have their ducks in a row, they want to know sooner, they want to have time to evaluate and think about their options. Early action is a nice option.
One thing too about the early action, if your student did not have a strong junior year and they had some D's on their report card, for example, they might want to wait for regular decision because it's going to look better to show good senior year grades first quarter. And they might be more likely to get in a regular decision. Or, if they see those poor grades, they might switch them into the regular decision pile anyway.
Yeah, and as we're meeting with students, if we see a student who says, I'm applying early action, and we know that they've really struggled, we would even recommend to them that maybe they hold off. Ultimately, it's their decision, but we certainly would try to give them a recommendation on when to apply. Okay. Other questions? Yes?
With the Common App, I know you said up to 10 schools or whatever the cutoff is, so it's not just one application fee, though, it's a separate application fee? Okay.
Yeah, so unfortunately, even though you're using that one application, each school is going to charge you separately an application fee for applying, and that's going to vary anywhere from $25 to $75, depending on the school.
Sometimes over 100.
Yes.
I would put in a quick plug too, so if you visit a school or interact with the college, or your child does, a lot of times they're asked to provide an email, and the colleges then oftentimes will send them emails, and then oftentimes try to kind of solicit them to ultimately apply. Many times, if a student visits a school or interacts with the school, the college may provide them with an application fee waiver. So definitely encourage your kids to look at the emails they're getting from the colleges, especially the colleges they've interacted with, because if the college provides them with an application fee waiver, when they go to apply, they'll basically be asked the question, do you have a credit card or do you have a fee waiver code? And if they have a fee waiver code, then they can put it in.
Your school email, because the school email generally blocks outside email, so the kids need a personal email account to apply to college.
Yeah, and we remind them of that. One thing Mr. Fitzgerald said that reminded me, there's something called demonstrated interest. Now, the Ivy Leagues and some of the more top-tier schools don't necessarily use this, but a lot of schools do, where they will make note of an applicant. Have they connected with us in any way? Have they taken a tour or requested information or followed us on Instagram? They want to see that the student has shown some sort of interest. And it's a small factor in the admissions process, but it is helpful, especially if they're looking at two applicants and they're like, well, this one's taken a tour with us, or they've emailed us, and this child hasn't done anything. It does get noted, so that's another reason why we encourage you to take a tour or reach out to schools that your child is interested in, because it could be helpful in the long run down the road.
I will say
I know a lot of times students will say like, oh yeah, I've been on that campus, my friend goes there, or we've driven by. That doesn't count as an official tour, so if you want that to be noted, you want the official tour.
But we're not saying 8 times.
No. All right, we're gonna wrap up, but we all will be up here for individual questions. And as I mentioned, I'll send an email out with the PowerPoint and some other supplemental handouts that might be helpful. So thank you all for coming.